I want to start with like just a few terms and definitions so we're all on the same page here. There is a difference between theosophy with a little t, like Theosophy, and the Theosophical Society. Theosophy, the term first comes to us from Plotinus, so many hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And in his definition, theosophy is the process by which we reach out to the divine. When Blavatsky and Olcott were getting going and were looking for a name for the society, by some accounts, the masters told Blavatsky it should be the Theosophical Society. So what does theosophy mean? The word theosophy comes from two roots, one Greek theo, and the second Sophia. We see Sophia show up in other words like sophistry, or in the great mosque / cathedral, the Hagia Sophia, the seat of wisdom. Sophia means wisdom and is in its original etymology linked to a feminine nature. Theo is from the Greek, and it's actually a very ancient word. It comes to us from the Proto-Indo-European language that preceded Sanskrit and Greek and these languages, and it means God. However, it doesn't mean a God. It doesn't mean specifically one deity. It means the concept of God. So when we're talking about what does theosophy mean, we're approaching it, if we look at those original roots, we're approaching it as using wisdom to approach whatever we might call God. And I think it's important to note too that in this one word, Theosophia, we have a masculine root and a feminine root, both describing two elements of one concept. So that's really important to keep in mind, that theosophy may show up in a lot of philosophical schools. In exegetics in the Episcopalian Church, they use the phrase theosophy to talk about how we approach talking about God or the divine. But the Theosophical Society as a unique organization, we'll get into a little bit more about what that means. Before we do, though, one of the elements of theosophy that is specifically impactful on the development of the United States, specifically the American idea of spirituality. But before we do that, I just want to read a little bit. This is from stanza 1, the Book of Zion, which Blavatsky tells us comes to us from a priestly class, that it's originally written in a language unknown to linguists, Senzar. But I'm going to read this for you real quick because we're also going to talk about the impact of Sanskrit on the Theosophical Society. And you may hear a few Sanskrit words in this selection. This also sets out what are called the stanzas in the Secret Doctrine. So we find those in both the Secret Doctrine and also pulled out in the Book of Zion. Anyway, or Book of Chan, as it's sometimes said. Stanza 1, the very beginning. The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. Universal mind was not, for there were no ahi to contain it. Those are the creative gods. The 7 ways to bliss were not. The great causes of misery were not, for there was no one to produce and get ensnared by them. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, for mother, father, and son were once more one, and the son had not yet awakened for the new wheel and his pilgrimage thereon. The 7 sublime lords and the 7 truths had ceased to be, and the universe, the sun of necessity, was immersed in paranishpana, absolute perfection, to be outbreathed by that which is and yet is not, for nothing was. It's really interesting to me that in this book, and in many, many religious traditions that talk about what existed before creation, we often get these kinds of metaphors, this idea of slumber or of silence or of darkness. And this idea of this sort of duality is going to be really important as we approach kind of a definition of or a more clear understanding of what the Theosophical Society teaches. So let's just talk a little history. Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 in November in New York City. There were about 13 people present. Included among them were Colonel Olcott and Helena Blavatsky, and William Quan Judge was also there. Blavatsky is a fascinating human being, but I'd like to talk about Olcott first because he is, it is surprising that someone of his educational and scientific capabilities was so interested in the unseen. Olcott was a lawyer and an agriculturalist and a journalist. In fact, he developed a new kind of sorghum in the 1880s that we still use today. In addition, he was tasked by President Lincoln and then President Grant to root out corruption in the Union Army during the Civil War. In addition, he came from a very, what we might call the last remnants of the Puritan class in New England. So his world was based on facts and science and structure, and his job really relied on that as well. Blavatsky, on the other hand, very different kind of human. I'm going to read you a few selections, and this is from a book called An American Covenant. It's by Lucille Scott, and it's relatively new, 2023, A Story of Women, Mysticism, and the Making of Modern America. There's a significant portion of the book is about Blavatsky because she had such an impact on the development of what we might call American spirituality. So anyway, I'm just going to read you a few selections so we can kind of get an idea of what Helena Blavatsky was like as a human being. As a child, Helena would boldly walk through her grandmother's gallery, past the frightening glass-paned cases filled with taxidermied alligators, silver seals, birds frozen mid-flight, and arachnids, all staring back at her, past the freestanding scarlet flamingo, large enough for a child to ride, on her way to the family library. Her great-grandfather, a Rosicrucian Freemason, first compiled the library, where Helena softly ran her sometimes sticky fingers across shelf after shelf of books on alchemy, astrology, hermeticism, and all things occult, and therefore secret, until one of the leather-bound volumes whispered to her, as inanimate things apparently did, and she would pull the volume out to study its magic. She was raised in a aristocratic Russian family. She was born in Dnieper in Ukraine. As of last week, the Blavatsky house where she was born is not currently under Russian occupation, but they have threatened several times. So we'll keep an eye on that. But Blavatsky fled her life. She was expected to marry a wealthy man and produce a bunch of children and carry on quietly learning embroidery and needlepoint. That wasn't really her destiny. In another section here, I'll talk about the way she talks about her own self-expression of gender. But she had a life that was like full of adventure. So in 1871, in July, she got on the SS Eumonia, which was bound for Alexandria, and it exploded just off the Greek isle of Spetsae when its cargo of gunpowder and fireworks combusted at sea. Now, there were 400 people aboard, and on the list of the survivors, there's only 16. And the name that's listed is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. So I think it's very interesting that this woman who ran away from her aristocratic life ends up being on a boat that blows up in the Mediterranean Ocean, and she survives. It's interesting what happens immediately after this. The Greek government gave all 16 survivors a pittance to cover immediate expenses and compensate them for their misfortune. HPB, it seems, promptly played roulette with her take, and she won, as she often did when she gambled. Using the windfall, she traveled to Cairo before gradually making her way up to Paris, where she eventually ran out of funds. Then, we're told, a roll of cash arrived directly from the Brotherhood along with orders. Despite her recent near-death experience at sea, she departed on the very next day on a steamer as she was instructed by the masters. Her destination was New York City. And when she got to New York City, she made a huge splash. She was super broke. She didn't really have a place to live, but she found journalists who were willing to interview her about what life was like in the mysterious land of Russia. So she kind of gained a little bit of fame like this. And and she had a deep love for New York City. It's very interesting. This is the account that actually comes from a journalist who saw her on the ship. Let's see. Among the passengers crowded onto the steamer's deck, their fraying monochromatic frocks and flat caps blurring into one, stood a very large woman, chain smoking in a flowing red oriental robe, its golden embroidery catching the morning light. She looked as if she'd been cut and pasted in from another story. I think that's interesting. Like the journalists of the time, and even her contemporaries, whether it's in the Theosophical Society or simply in the world at the time, recognized that this woman was very unique, and she stood out wherever she went. She eventually settled down on the Lower East Side in Greenwich Village. And she and Colonel Olcott moved into an apartment and filled it with broken antiques and taxidermy, including a taxidermied baboon whose name was Dr. Fiske. Dr. Fiske was a scientist at the time who was claiming that evolution was tried and true, and that there was no questions about it. And so Olcott and Blavatsky decided to name their taxidermied baboon after him. The friendship between Olcott and Blavatsky is really what sustains her in this time. He's still working. He's still legitimate in the world. She's kind of a wild weirdo. And their friendship, I think, is one of the reasons why the Theosophical Society flourished. They called each other pal and chum. Olcott was chum, Blavatsky was pal. Olcott also called Blavatsky Jack. And I think this is very interesting. Hang on to this tidbit when we start talking about the divine hermaphrodite of 8th Avenue, which is what one newspaper in New York called Blavatsky. There is this almost this elimination of gender expression in this friendship. And I think that's what leads to its successes. Their initial try, the Theosophical Society, didn't really work, and it fell apart. But as their friendship developed, that society really started to explode in popularity. One of the things that's going on in the United States at this time is what we're calling what most religious scholars call the Third Great Awakening. The Third Great Awakening is characterized by new religious movements in the United States. First one that comes to mind would be the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. Other things that came out of this Great Awakening would be the New Thought movement, which turned into Centers for Spiritual Living, and the Unity Church. Christian Science emerges. But more importantly, what emerges out of this is a Christian movement that is defined by baptism of the Spirit. This results in folks who have been baptized in the Spirit speaking in tongues, being able to handle things that a physical body ordinarily wouldn't handle. And it leads to what we see now and what we might define now as evangelical American Christianity. So we've got these really interesting opposing forces, at least in the religious world, between these new movements trying to make their way, and then this redefinition of the Christian gospel. And both of these things have a profound impact on the Theosophical Society and what Blavatsky and Olcott decide to do. When they finally do set up the society, the folks that were in the room at the time identified 3 founding goals. And these exist for us today as the 3 objects. But if we're not familiar, I'll just read them out real quick. To form a nucleus of universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. I'll point out that the current incarnation of the Theosophical Society in America has updated this object to include things like gender expression and religious inheritance. But this was revolutionary at the time, the idea that a Catholic and a Buddhist could sit down with mutual respect and find some way to agree. The second object is to encourage the study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and science, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. So this, this language gets altered a little bit in the 30s and 40s. Where we now say to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science, but I think the intention is the same. The idea is that we should, as a primary goal, do all we can to create an environment where the free exploration of ideas is welcome and supported and honored. And then the third one, and this is a fun one that a lot of people really kind of latch onto, to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the psychic powers latent in man. Now, nowadays, we don't say the psychic powers latent in man. I believe we just say the powers, yeah, the powers latent in man. But it's important to note that in its days, the Theosophical Society was all, the Theosophical Society heavily promoted and explored psychic powers, telekinesis, ESP, looking into past lives, these sorts of things. And today we still do those sorts of things, but our understanding comes from the secret doctrine. And that is that all of us as human beings have the capacity for these sort of super extra natural, we all have the potential for these extra natural capabilities. However, if we stay on some kind of path led by a good heart intention and empathy and self-inspection and self-introspection and meditation, that eventually these sorts of things, the psychic capabilities, the ability to see things that the average human eye can't see, these develop. And they develop as the human being becomes more evolved. So after the first iteration of the Theosophical Society, less emphasis was put on sort of making silver spoons fly through the air, which was that was one of Blavatsky's favorite things to do. Because basically what she said was, if we keep doing all of these fancy like psychic tricks and stuff, then we're really giving way to the extremism of superstition, that we stop focusing on the really important task, which I'll get to here in a second, but I can say very basically, to ease human suffering. If we're sitting around in some parlor doing card tricks and making spoons fly through the air, how much suffering are we actually easing? So, oh, here it is. Yes. Okay. So I want to read you this because this is directly counter to, I think, a lot of the popular opinion about theosophists and who theosophists are and what they're like. Um, so this is again from An American Covenant by Lucille Scott. HPB brought the Western masses karma, astrology, reincarnation, yoga, meditation, and more. She provided the philosophical seeds of the New Age. And Theosophy quickly went from the verge of its last rites, when they were just sort of like a psychic investigation club, to a global phenomenon. Its ranks included disillusioned spiritualists and occultists, but also, more importantly, I would say suffragettes, socialists, progressives, innovators, intellectuals, queers, anti-colonialists, and bohemians. Now, at this time in New York City, the bohemians were taking the city by storm, these wild people, you know, who were dressed strangely and they didn't want to follow the rules of society. And according to rumors that were very prevalent in New York City, the Theosophists parties had dancing. They had peacock feathers. They had ironic uses of smoking jackets. And they had a natural affinity with both Theosophy's eternal truths of personal freedom and Blavatsky's means of conveying these truths via something akin to the theater of the absurd. This is important. A style so over the top fake, it rang out profoundly untrue. Unlike most in the staid nation in the United States at the time, the Bohemians really got Madame Blavatsky. Camp is an art that proposes itself seriously, but cannot be taken altogether seriously because it's too much. Susan Sontag wrote that in Notes on Camp. One should either be a work of art or wear a work of art, stated Oscar Wilde, also a theosophist. Though subversively queer, camp is not arch or ironic. It is not self-loathing. It has a big heart, a joyful earnestness, a profound truth in its heightened artifice. So shortly after HBB became the rage and her camp ways became the toast of literati and the glitterati of the American Gilded Age. This is the time period when we get people like Jack London, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, sort of these personalities from the Gilded Age that really speak to the iconoclastic nature of this group of people that was getting together and dancing and partying and freaking each other out. And you know, it almost reminds me of like the late 60s and like, you know, freakouts and like, how can we show the man, you know? And I think it's wonderful that the Theosophists, while through the majority of the 20th century have been portrayed or viewed as dusty lecturers with old books with too many words. I mean, I often joke when people come into our library that Theosophy is sometimes the fine art of presenting 10,000 words where none would do. So as we move through the 20th century, that is really the impression that folks got of the Theosophical Society. And I really want to make sure we remember to push back on that, because the original Theosophists who were hanging out in that Lower East Side apartment were the weirdos, they were the wanderers, they were the marginalized, they were the, well, like Annie Besant, a single mother by choice in Victorian England. These were people who looked at the structures of the world and said, no, that's not for me. And that informs on a key truth of the Theosophical Society's teachings, which is that we bow to no external authority. No gods, no masters. So, New York City, wild. That first generation of Theosophists, wild. I've got another thing I'd like to read here. And this is The Universal Spirit, Exploring Theosophical Questions. And this is a brand new book that came out by Doug Keene, who is currently the national president of the Theosophical Society. And And this really speaks to how theosophy works in practice, right? To be an adherent of theosophy requires no belief in doctrine, save the unity of all humanity. Each is free to explore avenues and corners to which he or she may be attracted. There's no need to recite or even believe any particular teaching. We are constantly being told not to accept a specific concept because it was spoken by someone with recognition or written in an acclaimed book. We are counseled to explore for ourselves, to search where we may, and then make up our own minds. We need not delve into the writings of the masters or even recognize the existence of some ascended master. If Madame Blavatsky's writings are too dense, plenty of other authors are available. If we find the talk of globes and rounds and chains overwhelming, we don't need to dwell on that. Theosophy, like all traditions, has a history variegated with personalities and opinions, but is something much more. It has an aliveness and an immediacy. It begins to lift the veil of life's secrets. It embraces the mystery of who we are as individuals and what we can accomplish together. This is from Blavatsky's own words. There is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling. The power to bless and save humanity. And for those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. For me, honestly, that makes theosophy much less dusty and old and much more alive. I want to quote Albert Einstein real quick. Albert Einstein, fascinating man in his own right, sort of a tangential theosophist. He never really joined, but he went to lots of meetings. And when he died, there's this beautiful photo of his very, very messy desk, books and stuff. But right in the center of the photo, you can see his dog-eared, completely worn out copy of The Secret Doctrine. So what he says is, the most beautiful and deepest experience a man can have is the sense of mysterious. It is the underlying principle of religion, as well as all serious endeavor in art and science. He who never had this experience seems to me, if not dead, then at least blind. To sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there is something that our mind cannot grasp, and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly and as a feeble reflection, this is religiousness. In this sense, Albert Einstein says, I am religious. To me, it suffices to wonder at these secrets and to attempt humbly to grasp with my mind a mere image of the lofty structure of all that there is. The scientist's religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that, compared with it, all the systemic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. I think Albert Einstein nailed it right there on the head. You know, I mean, he's basically saying that all religion is simply that moment when we choose to be curious. And as Blavatsky was saying earlier, we don't have to. We are not required as human beings to explore anything. We are required, however, to stay in our incarnation until it passes. And while we're in incarnation, we can choose to ease the suffering of humanity. But Theosophy teaches reincarnation. So if we don't get it right this time, chances are you'll get another opportunity later on. And ideally, as we go through these incarnations, we retain the learning that we take from each lifetime. there are some basic tenets of theosophy, and I'm just going to go over them pretty quickly. If you're in the library and you come and visit us here at the Seattle Lodge, these are available printed out for you all over the place. It comes from the basic ideas of occult wisdom by Anna Kennedy Winter, who was an early theosophist. I don't know if I mentioned, I've said the word occult a few times. When we say occult or occultism or occult science, this is simply exploring that which is not seen. Have you ever heard the word or of the item called an oculus? It's a similar situation. Okay, we're talking about the eyes, the ocular, the seeing. So some basic ideas of occult wisdom, and I'll go through these quickly, and then at any point we can always dig on deeper. Number one, this is important. The foundation of all that exists is an eternal, immutable, maybe it's a principle, which precedes all manifestation. Any speculation or discussion about its nature is fruitless, but from that foundation arises all manifest existence. So if you've ever dug deep into the Catholic tradition, oftentimes when we're in the process of exegesis, of trying to understand a biblical passage, the church fathers gave very clear instruction that when we come to the moment where we might start to define what this immutable principle is, we've committed a heresy. So in a long traditions in the Catholic Church, and also in the Vedas, we see that the sheer act of trying to name or to identify this principle makes it cease to exist as reality for us. Because in the act of naming something, we then separate ourselves from that thing which is named. The second basic idea, the material of the cosmos. Okay, this is really fun because quantum physics is now proving and giving us data to show what Theosophists in the early days were trying to explain, which is that there is nothing in existence or not existence that is not linked by the same material, and there is nothing that is not conscious. Now, when we take this to like kind of a sort of theosophical orthodoxy, like really rooted in the secret doctrine, we learn, according to Blavatsky and some teachers preceding her, that the earth is a conscious being. The moon is a conscious being. The space between those two bodies in the heaven is a conscious being. The shoes I'm wearing, conscious beings. The rocks that we walk around, conscious beings. So we can take that to the extreme, but I think the most important thing is simply to recognize that the Theosophical Society is teaching that in every atom is some element of that immutable principle that we don't define and don't name. No, number three. Number three is a great one. I want you to imagine sitting on a beach and nice calm ocean, say, and we all know like that feeling of like the waves coming in and the waves going out. People talk about that in meditation a lot, and but that idea of the waves coming in and the waves going out. Now, the waves don't go out because they've come in, and they don't come in because they've gone out. This is simply the natural flow of what the ocean is doing. And that is a wonderful, wonderful metaphor for this idea of constant involution and evolution, pulling in to develop and then expressing out. And Blavatsky talks about this existing in in every single element of what we know as reality, that things pull within and then they go back out. We see that in the ocean. But we also certainly see in the cycles of history, civilizations developing to like really great heights and then devolving. Now, according to Blavatsky, this devolution is just as important as the evolution because it breaks down the structures that hold the old way of thinking. So in order to evolve, we're going to have to destroy what exists now and move on. But that idea of involution and evolution is something that is, well, it's also really fun to contemplate. And I would encourage you to do that. Number 4 here is cycles of manifestation. So, according to the Theosophical Society teachings through Blavatsky, as the universe expresses itself, we go through different cycles of manifestation. And we can see this, Blavatsky was heavily influenced by Charles Darwin. And we can see the cycle of manifestation in, say, the evolution of a plant or the evolution of a tree, where the initial tree that grows is going to be adapted and controlled and will conform to the environment that it grows in. But the next tree that comes out of that likely will not be susceptible to the diseases of the previous tree. That this evolution is constantly occurring. And the thing that was really important about what Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society say is that this evolution is not limited to the material world. It's not just fish growing legs and then coming up on the land. It's the fish's own perception of its own consciousness is also involved in that. That the evolution of the soul, for lack of a better word, the evolution of that infinite thing within us that is constant, happens alongside the physical or material evolution of biological entities. Number 5 is super important, and it's going to follow up by one that's also super important: reincarnation. Okay, so about a year before Blavatsky died, she said that the culture of the United States would not be prepared to fully integrate Theosophical Society teachings until about 125 years after her death. That puts us at about 2006. And I would agree with her. I would argue that in 2006, no one would give you the side eye for talking about reincarnation. People make past life jokes all the time. Karma is something we hear about all the time in popular culture. And so, in the context of the Third Great Awakening of these new religious movements and the Pentecostal pushback, the idea of reincarnation brings this sort of unity of Eastern thought and Western thought, which is another goal of the Theosophical Society. The definitions of reincarnation that we have right now, they are, well, there's no consensus, which is great, because here at the Theosophical Society, consensus means that we're done learning. So, so in some traditions, reincarnation can happen in conjunction with karma, that we are somehow punished by putting the soul into a lesser being because of our actions in a past life, that somehow reincarnation can be serve as a component of justice. In the Theosophical Society, we don't agree with that. There's so much that happens to a human being when they are incarnated that is completely outside of their control. People are not punished by their incarnations. In the theosophical tradition, generally speaking, humans don't incarnate into animals, and animals don't incarnate into plants. Because in Blavatsky's cosmology, her idea of evolution, we start with the rocks and the minerals, and those evolve into plants, and then the plants evolve into animals, and the animals evolve into humans. So you can see it's not a very by our standards, not a very scientific approach to the idea of evolution, but it answers the question, where do we go when we die? We come right back, and luckily, according to Blavatsky, as human beings. Now, I'll say, in our modern American society, the idea of reincarnation, the theosophical definition of reincarnation is not very popular. I think a lot of people, and I have some dear friends who have expressed this, would really like to not have to do the whole human thing again. They would be perfectly satisfied being a house cat or a piece of plankton or just a rock on a mountainside. Blavatsky says, too bad, too bad. You evolved to a point where you got the chance to be a human and learn and grow and help humanity ease its suffering. So that's your path. Now, of course, this ties in a lot to the bodhisattva idea in the Vajrayana tradition. This idea that we can achieve enlightenment, full nirvana, full release, and reconnection with the source. And then as bodhisattvas, we can make the choice to be incarnated again on earth to further the spiritual evolution of humanity. Now, we have no doctrines or dogmas, so I'm not going to tell you like one way is correct and one way is not. I have no way of knowing that. But it's interesting to note that even in the early Christian church, and we see this in the Gnostic Gospels, reincarnation is heavily spoken about. And it is specifically the soul leaving the body and being placed into a new body. That did not last after the Council of Nicaea, unfortunately. In Judaism, and especially in pre-rabbinic Judaism, but also in post-rabbinic Judaism, defined by the existence of the Talmud and the Midrash and the spoken commentaries, reincarnation persists until about the 1400s. And then something happens to the Jewish community in the 1400s, and they become scattered. I'm talking about the Inquisition. And this knowledge gets scattered, and so different communities start to develop their own ideas about the afterlife and the passage of life. But this is all to say that in the earliest incarnations of monotheistic faiths, we still have the persistence of this pre-monotheistic idea of reincarnation. And so that, to the Theosophical Society and to many of us Theosophists, that makes it very clear. If we see this tradition extending over a long period of time, multiple unrelated and unconnected groups of humans expressing the same idea, then it is possible that that is a universal idea to the experience of humanity. The next one on this list, it's number 6 on this list, and the word that they use is justice. And I'm not even going to open that can of worms. Whoa. I prefer the word karma. And with the idea of karma, this is the idea that the soul learns from experience. That once we're individuals, once we're incarnated as human individuals, the things that we do have a ripple effect on the entire universe. It's perfectly, is it Isaiah? Might be Luke. One of the Bible guys. As one sows, so shall one reap. So karma, there's no good karma, there's no bad karma. Karma simply is. In Sanskrit, it means action. So if we take an action, if I inhale, there's karma. If I am kind to someone, that's also karma. Number 7 here is really fun and is part of, you'll see when I talk about New Age movements, was kind of a unique proposal by the Theosophical Society. But it's this idea that in between our incarnations, there's time. Well, it's not time as we would see it, but there's a space that exists in between incarnations. We see this illustrated in, for example, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where after the pharaoh dies, he's equipped with all of the things that he needs to take this post-life journey. Now, in the Egyptian cosmology, the pharaoh is not necessarily going to be reincarnated, but they point to this space between death and whatever the next thing is. And that's something that the Theosophical Society promotes the exploration of. Like, what we ideally are evolving back towards a full expression of this immutable principle. We, according to the Theosophical Society, we are not chemical accidents whose consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of mindless neurology. Okay, so we fully accept science, right? We enjoy science and allow it to become part of our spiritual understanding. But the one thing that is really important to the teachings of Blavatsky is that you are not a mistake. And I am not a mistake. And I am not some happenstance of chaotic elements that magically came together and created a human. This pervades New Age spirituality. You are here for a reason, is essentially what she's saying. And in the early days of Theosophy, in that religious context, that was a really bold thing to say. Because she's not just saying good people are here for a reason. She's saying that jerk down the street is also here for a reason. Some might argue that jerk is the reason for their existence is to teach you patience. I don't know. But all of us, there is an intention, there is a plan, if you want to go that far. But I like to think there's order. There's order in the universe. Okay, number 8 is a big one, the purpose of life. Okay. Every religious tradition tries to answer this question. Why are we here? What are we doing? What are we supposed to do? At the Theosophical Society, like I said, we have no doctrines or dogmas. I would argue we have way more questions than we have answers. But we can kind of triangulate maybe why we're here by looking at why other people have been here. I can't tell you, in the Theosophical tradition, I have no authority to tell you what truth is. But I can provide information that maybe leads you to your own assessment of what the truth is. And that is part of our purpose in life, is to be expressions of this immutable principle and show each other and teach each other and guide each other. And I would add, oh, and it's right here. I thought I was adding something extra, but yeah, our job, I'll just read this verbatim. Each person is unique with different strengths and abilities, but every person's highest good is furthered when they consciously practice the virtues taught in all the major religions: kindness, honesty, empathy, generosity, etc. Such a life is not merely an exercise in civility, but it is an active step towards the full realization of our truest nature. Our experience as humans had a beginning, and once all the lessons are learned, the soul can return to its source. I like that answer. I like that answer. What is the meaning of life? Who knows? Just be kind and generous and try to get through it. And in that way, that's how Theosophy, as sort of like esoteric philosophy, becomes practical. You know, if I don't have time to meditate, I do have time to be kind. And if I don't have time to be kind to a stranger, I certainly have time to be kind to myself. And that simple act produces a ripple effect throughout the universe. And many Theosophists would argue that one good deed impacts the very elements of creation. In the Jewish tradition, we get this idea: saving one person is equivalent to saving all of humanity. Because we are unique and we're special and we're important and we're here for a reason, when we lift each other up, when we provide empathy and kindness and generosity, we are helping ourselves. Sorry, I got a little teary-eyed. But I think this is really important. If we can't fix all of the problems in the world, if we can't end the chaos and the suffering that we see every day, then maybe we can end the chaos and suffering within our own minds. And if we do that, then we can become really helpful to humanity. And I would argue that our purpose, if we choose to call ourselves Theosophists, is to ease human suffering, or at least just, try not to add to it. And sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes we have to participate in systems that are made to break us down. And in those, we hope to stay strong and kind and empathetic. I want to read a little bit from... Okay, so this is from Imogen Simons, and this is 1938. And I just want to read this to you because even in 1938, which if you're following along the timeline, we would kind of call the second wave, or second generation of Theosophists. Here's what she has to say. We are all engaged in the business of living, more or less successfully, more or less happily. Are we as successful and happy, as effective in our everyday lives as we could be? If not, what is the reason? We are remarkably successful in this age in the manipulation of physical laws with radio, television, radar, and other electric and electronic devices. We have conquered distance and time. In travel, even into outer space. Now, remember, at this time, we were sending things kind of out there. We have attained an unprecedented degree of efficiency. But when it comes to living, our story is different. In our own relation to other human beings, to our own health, to our own feelings, our own work, our leisure, we don't often apply the same intelligence and realism. We have been inhibited in our willingness to investigate by certain opinions, attitudes, and beliefs which have been instilled in us by our backgrounds. The most tremendous problems of life, such as the mysteries of birth and death, of joy and sorrow, freedom and fate, have not been probed with the same intensity as that which has marked our investigations of the physical universe. Our questing intellects are burdened with all sorts of conflicting teachings on which discussion, until very recently, has been more or less discouraged. Today, and again, this is 1938, today, however, the world is changing with bewildering rapidity. New scientific discoveries are daily finding their place in the body of human knowledge. New philosophies are making their bid for allegiance in the mind of man. Strange and startling ideas are being advanced in the field of religion and in the name of religion. Studies in depth psychology are bringing to light the vast and intricate potentials of human consciousness. Forced out of the tight compartments of traditional beliefs into this inescapable vortex of change, we may feel lost and filled with despair. So in the lead up to what we would later call World War II, it seems like folks were also having great difficulty with chaos, with the rapidity with which science was developing, and how we kind of adapt our spiritual being to that. This she includes in this writing a quote from Blavatsky. Theosophy is the shoreless ocean of universal truth, love, and wisdom, reflecting its radiance upon earth. The Theosophical Society was formed to show mankind that it exists. I hope that as we're going through some of these more esoteric ideas, you're starting to see the through line, which is humanism. It is almost a spiritual humanism. Okay, back to our lovely list here. Number 9, those who have preceded us. If we look at religious traditions all over the world, we see one element that is very common, especially in non-Christian traditions, is the deification or the respect given or deference given to the ancestors. And this is partially what we're talking about here, is that folks have come before us and learned things and gained knowledge and experience, and we are allowed to take that knowledge and experience and help it to build our lives. And it's interesting to note too, in Blavatsky's cosmology, humanity is much older than science might tell us it is today. When she talks about those who have come before us, she's talking about in her conception, millions and millions and millions, tens and hundreds of millions of years of human evolution. So when she says those who have preceded us, she's not just talking about like my grandparents. She's talking about some mystical humanoid who may have existed millions of years ago. It's fun though. It's fun to kind of thought experiment that. If we're on a spiritual journey and we get frustrated, we can just take faith in knowing that some luminous being a million years ago figured it out, so maybe we can too. And if we don't get it done in this life, we got another chance. The hidden path is number 10. When we're talking about the Theosophical Society and occultism and esoteric versus exoteric, esoteric is secret, exoteric is apparent. This idea of a hidden path shows up in a lot of religious traditions, and it especially shows up in new religious movements of the 20th and 21st century. Basically, the idea is that you have your soul, or your immutable essence, has a destination that it's supposed to get to. And whether that destination is evolution, uh, whether that destination is self-love, we all have this path. Now, it's also important to note that all spiritual beings, which is every single element of consciousness and incarnation, is also on this path. Every fish you see, every star that shoots through the galaxy is on a hidden path of evolution. So there's a lot of sort of philosophical stuff. We're going to take a brief fun fact break. Fun fact, the community at Point Loma, which was established by Catherine Tingley, who took over the American section of the International Theosophical Society when Blavatsky passed, or when Olcott passed, excuse me. The Theosophical community at Point Loma is responsible, according to botanists and agriculturalists, for bringing the avocado to the United States. So that's pretty fun. Theosophists can be directly tied to the responsibility for avocados, and especially in California. They were in Point Loma, California. Another fun fact, I'm basically just, this is sorbet for my brain before I launch into another thing. Another fun fact is that the rules of baseball were codified and written down by Abner Doubleday, who envisioned in baseball an example of the soul's journey through the universe. 3 phases of existence: the youth at first base, the middle age at second base, the old age at third base, and then we return home to start all over again. Anyway, fun facts. So what is the Theosophical Society today? Today is a very small organization. The Theosophical Society hit its peak in 1935, and ever since then has been declining in membership. Now, most organizations would be like, oh no, we got to get new members. We are taught very clearly. I actually just read a little bit in Pablo Sender, talk that Pablo Sender gave. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many members we have. The Theosophical Society is merely a vehicle for the communication of the possibility for the evolution of the soul. So we could have 2 members or we could have 1,000 members. I think most often in my job here, when I talk to strangers about theosophy, it is very rare that someone says, oh, I totally disagree with that. Now, remember when I said Blavatsky said that the United States would not be ready for theosophy until about 125 years after her death? What we see now in modern American spirituality are very clearly Theosophical Society ideas. This idea that I could be a devout, confirmed Catholic, go to confession every week, but it is no sin to participate in a Zen Buddhist meditation group. The idea that people of opposing viewpoints could sit together in one room and recognize each other's humanity. This is an original goal of the Theosophical Society. When you see, like, it's really popular in kids' clothes for a while, where it say, I love love, or choose kindness, or be nice, one could argue that there is an element in American culture today in the United States of theosophical teachings becoming integrated. And in becoming integrated, it's really hard to pull out and say, oh, well, that's only a theosophical teaching, or that came straight from Blavatsky. And Blavatsky herself would argue, don't do that. There's no point in doing that. Theosophy is not for a select few. Theosophical Society does not hold the exclusive rights to truth. In fact, we might be wrong about the whole thing, but we are more than willing to look at new evidence and come to a new conclusion. We can be theosophists by paying our dues. We can become Theosophists by being kind to our neighbors. The point is, Theosophy and the Theosophical Society, in Blavatsky's own words, is nothing new. It has been with us since the beginning of humanity. This desire, Joseph Campbell says that the origin of religion was when the first person who discovered fire showed it to someone else. And I think this is profound. This is profound, and it speaks to what our work is in the Theosophical Society. We aren't here to change anyone's minds. We aren't here to proselytize. You can become a member or not become a member, agree or disagree, atheist or theist. What we are attempting to do as a nucleus of universal familyhood is to simply provide opportunities to show humanity that there are ways to escape suffering. There are ways to help each other that are beyond what the material world has to offer. So I think it's a really great place to wrap up, but I will leave you with a little bit of, yeah. So this is from Studies in the Secret Doctrine. Oh no, this isn't the one I wanted. Let's see here. Oh, I seem to have lost the quote. I'll just paraphrase. One can call himself a theosophist if he moves through the world with kindness, if he helps those who are suffering, if he provides rest to those who are weary. One can call himself a theosophist if he is born. One can call himself a theosophist if he dies. No one needs, there is no necessity for one to call oneself a theosophist. Simply by being incarnated and clinging to an idea of wonder and cherishing humanity, you become a theosophist. There's a wonderful book. There's a wonderful book that was put out by the Department of Education, which was the new name they gave the Department of Propaganda at the Theosophical Society. And it's called Theosophical Questions Answered by L.W. Rogers. And I really like that he points out at the very beginning of the book, and this is 1924, so this is still in that same second phase of very serious, dusty theosophists. He says, with such questions and answers, the following pages have been filled. However, the answers may be incorrect. The questions may be poorly posed. Of course, it must be remembered that any particular question would likely be answered by different students in different ways. Thus, the question, what is theosophy, might have a dozen truthful answers from as many as a dozen students, each reflecting that phase of the one great truth that most appeals to him. Perhaps none of us can fully answer any question. We can only say something about it that may help the inquirer in his search for truth and lead him to a path of human kindness. I think that's a great place to stop.